Welcome to Methodically Processing Systems. I'm your host, Matrin Asa. On this podcast, we explore systems. Systems are all around us. Everything is a system, and every system is part of another system. Some are small, some are large, and all get weird and entertaining the longer you look at them. That's what we do on this podcast. We look at systems until they reveal their weirdness. We do this not to make you a better person or the world a better place, but rather to entertain ourselves. So, if you're ready, let's entertain ourselves. The way to success. When you were growing up, you always heard this phrase, "Don't be afraid of failure." And it was always odd, because on the one hand, you heard this phrase over and over again, and on the other, you and everyone around you had this intense fear of failure. If failure was such a great thing, why did school have failing grades? Why did your parents and teachers frown upon actual failure? There was this really odd disconnect between what we were told and how everyone behaved. You were told that failure would make you stronger, that it would teach you a lesson or two. But anytime things got real, the people around you most likely tried to steer you away from failure rather than towards it. Realistically, most of your childhood was rather sheltered. You lived in a defined space with defined rules, defined outcomes, and if you were unfortunate enough, defined bedtimes and defined playtimes. What do we mean by defined? Well, look at something like school. School is the ultimate defined activity and environment. If you play by the rules and do well, you move to the next level. If you don't play by the rules and you don't do well, you stay back. If you play by the rules, do 100 times better than your nearest competition, you don't graduate from life with a diploma. You still go up just a single level, maybe two if someone is really noticing. It's like a board game. The better you do, the most that can happen is that you win the game. There's nothing beyond what is defined. The outcomes are largely equalized by the defined nature of the game. So you kind of realize that the reason you're told it's okay to fail, or that failure makes you stronger, is because your immediate context is well defined and the downside risk and upside risks are both clipped. The worst and the best that can happen to you within that context are not going to end or change your world that dramatically. But school doesn't exist in isolation. It interacts with the real world. And because we've set up a great chunk of life to pull from this bizarre game we've created, especially the younger you are, we also know that failure within the game can start to have effects outside of that game. If you fail at school, we tend to think that you may end up in a worse situation in life overall. So that's why we tell you to go ahead and be okay with failure with a wink, a nudge, and a pound of salt. Life, however, is nothing like school. In your life, rules change. You can write your own rules. You can work with others to change the rules. There is randomness. Rules get created and modified by things beyond your control. There are hidden rules, rules you can never be privy to, but that still affect you. In real life, failure and success are uncapped. You might think the worst that can happen to you in life is that you die, and then you're out permanently. Things could be even worse. You could end up failing so catastrophically that it badly affects not just you, but innocent people and creatures around you. In real life, you could make decisions that affect your whole family, your community, your country, or even your whole planet. Presumably, as our technology improves, you could fail so hard in life that you affect this entire universe, and maybe some others too. You could also have so much success that you could end up ruling the world, or turning mankind into a spacefaring civilization. The limit is your imagination. This is one of those fundamental things that school never prepares you for. School is well defined. Real life is undefined. While failing a quiz in school might not be the end of the world, a horrible technology you invent and choose to use could well be the very end of the world. Failure of that sort doesn't make you or anyone else stronger. Dead people, after all, can't learn from their mistakes. So, as much as people like to say that failure makes you stronger, it's only true in cases where you can carefully limit your downside risk. If the worst that can happen to you is that you're inconvenienced for a brief period of time, then sure, you may be able to learn from your failure. Now, once you figure this out, you start to see a lot of the baloney in the world when it comes to how humans treat failure, especially when it comes to fields like psychology, where people seem to get off on calling human behavior irrational, loss averse, and a bunch of other smart sounding but hollow labels. As we keep saying on this show, in some form or another, life on this planet has evolved to survive, and it's had a long time, way more than you or I have been around to figure survival out. Psychologists, on the other hand, do their work, if they are decent psychologists, experimentally inside a lab. And what's the defining characteristic of a lab experiment? Well, it's impeccably well defined and well controlled. And here's the problem. Humans haven't co-evolved with laboratories. We've co-evolved with the messy, least defined, most complex, and highly uncontrolled environment, the real world. It's like the complete opposite of a lab. So, in a laboratory, you might get some kind of experiment that tries to discern a problem like this. What would you rather have? $10,000 right now, no strings attached, or $1 million right now, but with a 1 in 5 chance that you will drop dead in the next week? Got your answer? Okay. So what'll basically happen is that you and probably most people will say something like, I'd rather take the $10,000 with no strings attached. And the psychologist will go, fascinating. And then they'll go off and sit in their tool of choice and run the naive math behind all this. They'll ask, what is the expected value of each choice? And you get that by multiplying the probabilities of potential outcomes by the magnitude of each of the outcomes. Of course, all the outcomes are only from what's represented in the lab setting. Never mind the context of your life and the world that you are a part of. Okay, so let's do it. Let's be the psychologists and run the numbers. You can do this math with me, probably in your head. Trust me. So, what's the expected value if you take the $10,000 with no strings attached? Again, remember, we're only going to consider the lab outcomes. It's a lab game, if you will. So, if you take that choice, you have a 100% chance of having $10,000. And there are no other possible outcomes once you do. No strings attached. So, we multiply 100% by $10,000, which gives us $10,000. So your expected value for this choice is $10,000. Let's see what happens if you pick choice 2. If you had picked the $1 million option, things are a bit more complicated, but I bet you can still do the math with me. Instead of just multiplying, we're going to also need to add. So here we go. If you pick the $1 million option, you have a 1 in 5 chance of dying, which means at the end of the week, you have a 20% chance of having $0. Why $0? Well, because you're dead, and dead people can't enjoy their money. If you have a 20% chance of being dead, you have an 80% chance of being alive with $1 million. So we multiply 20% by 0, and that gives us 0. And then we multiply 80% by 1 million, which gives us 800,000. We add these two results together for a grand total of $800,000. Our expected value for the second choice is $800,000. So now if you're a psychologist, you look at this number and you say, well, $800,000 is a bigger expected value than $10,000. So the rational choice here would be to take the $1 million with a 1 in 5 chance of dropping dead within a week. And then you conclude that people are just irrational. And you go off, you write your paper, and you become world famous. The math doesn't lie, right? Of course it does. The math is correct, but the expected value calculations we use don't even begin to capture the complexity and sophistication of judgment that humans are bringing to this simplistic lab experiment. And the best way to just illustrate this is to think about it probabilistically. If in the real world humans were wired to make simple expected value judgments, there'd be no humans left. If people took that $1 million and a 1 in 5 chance of dropping dead within a week bet, and they did this repeatedly each week, within a matter of weeks, probabilistically, there'd be no humans left on this planet. A couple of weeks in, the few people that might be left might be multimillionaires, but gradually they would disappear too if they kept on taking the bet over and over again. So we are absolutely biased. We are biased away from decisions that lead to uncapped failure. That is absolutely true. If you take $1 million and you die, there's no one around to enjoy the million. But your own death means you can never take another bet or make another choice in your life ever again. You're out. Not only are you multiplied by 0, but there could be negative repercussions from your death. Your family, your friends, your environment, the whole world might be worse off for it. The gene pool would lose genetic diversity. For all we know, the true expected value of taking a $1 million and a 1 in 5 chance of death bet is well into the negatives. Within the conditions of the laboratory, the expected value might be $800,000, but in the real world, that could well be negative $5 billion for all we know. The truth is that we are paranoid about failure, and it's not irrational. It helps us survive as not just individuals, but as a species and as this thing that we call life on Earth. So when we make decisions, we don't go after the most lucrative outcome, but instead we try to minimize the worst harm that can befell us. It's only when we stray away from this instinct that the worst things tend to happen to us. And really, the only place this instinct of ours doesn't help us is when we can genuinely control and clip that downside risk. In those cases, if the worst thing that can happen to you is not that bad at all, take as many risks as you want. So in our example, if the bet is that you get $1 million, but for 1 year you have a 100% chance of having a mild, annoying, self-limiting chronic cold, take the $1 million. So all of this brings us to the way to success. Now, if you're from America, you've heard this phrase, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. That is, you can't succeed if you aren't there to succeed. And it sounds obvious, but the moment people get the slightest bit of smarts or success, or they find a little bit of an edge, they forget this. Knowledge, for whatever reason, makes us feel invincible. When you have some kind of an edge, it's tempting to override your paranoia and that bias and that fear of catastrophic loss. But knowledge, or any edge, is going to be imperfect, which means you aren't invincible. Large downside risks are always going to be something to consider. And you always have to find a way to minimize it so that you can have that peace of mind. What's the worst thing that can happen, and how do you avoid it? That's the secret to success. The best way to become successful is to be around and able to work towards that success. If you lose big time, you'll never make it. If you're out of the game, you'll never win. If you survive, if you stay in the game, you have a chance. There is a number. It's called 0. And it's the most powerful number. Anything multiplied by it, even infinity, is going to get you 0. Success is about not getting multiplied by 0. You can lose a little here and a little there. Small losses are good. They help you grow stronger. But you never want to get multiplied by 0, a big loss. It's going to derail or end your efforts towards getting to that success. So the best way to avoid getting multiplied by 0 is to remove things from your life that can multiply you or some aspect of your life by 0. Smoking increases your chances of getting multiplied by 0. If you gamble, you're more likely to have your finances multiplied by 0. Driving carelessly eventually gets you multiplied by 0. Taking risks you don't fully understand will get you multiplied by 0. Being impolite to strangers you meet outside can get you multiplied by 0. You can look at this across your entire life or within a particular aspect of your life as well. If you want to be a good friend, you can be great at a wide range of things, but if something multiplies some aspect of your friendship by 0, you're not a good friend. If you're a raging alcoholic, your qualities as a friend get multiplied by 0. If you're not trustworthy or loyal, you get multiplied by 0. If you know you're going to get multiplied by 0 and you can't prevent it, you'll want to compartmentalize. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. If you make your living driving a truck and you think truck driving is going to get multiplied by 0, it's time to make sure you're earning a side income so you're not punched out if your fears are realized. The way to success is about avoiding the way to failure. Everything else is fluff. There are as many ways to succeed in the world as there are atoms in the universe. So you can basically forget about how to be successful. You can find something eventually. But there's only a small number of ways to zero. Remove those things from your life. As long as you're not zeroed out, you can keep looking for one of those infinite ways to succeed.